Welcome to the PeakDay podcast, where we discuss fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guests are Adriana and Samuel Vasquez. Married in 2010, Samuel and Adriana Vasquez collaborate at home and at work. Between the two, they have served in various leadership capacities in the Archdiocese of New York, Oakland, Orange, Sacramento, Arlington, and Phoenix. Currently, Samuel serves as the Managing Director of Hispanic Evangelization, and Adriana serves as the Managing Director of Marriage and Family Evangelization, both in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. They are blessed with 2 children and attend St. Gertrude Parish in Madeira, Ohio. Welcome, Samuel and Adriana.
Thank you for having us.
So you guys sound like you're busy, both working at the Archdiocese and family and everything that goes along with that. How do you manage it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have never really slowed down since we met. We were both working full-time and working on doctorates in Washington, D.C. And since then, we've moved how many times?
5 times.
5 or 6 times. And we've lived all over the country. And I think by God's grace, we've managed to settle here in Cincinnati now for going on 4 years this fall.
So you met in college, or did you say grad school? I'm sorry.
Grad school.
You
Yes.
met in grad school.
Yeah.
All righty. So had either of you heard about natural family planning before you were married?
I had heard about natural family planning in college, but after graduating from college, I worked out in California for a Catholic organization out there, and I went to a presentation given by an NFP only doctor. His name was Patty Jim Baggett. He does, I think, the Creighton method and NAPRO technology. So he gave like a 2-3 hour presentation. And I remember he was just describing everything, and he kept on saying something to the tune of like, the signs are what allow you to put your finger on the cervix. And I thought, wait, that's kind of a strange thing to say, but it's just his way of saying that the signs that a woman observes allow you to know what the cervix is doing, so that you know whether, you are open. This is a possibility that children could be conceived at this moment or not. And I didn't take the class to learn it, but it was a very thorough introduction. And then when we got married, I found out she was already a Billings instructor.
Yeah, so for me, it was in my home. It was the air I breathed. My parents worked first as crisis pregnancy center volunteers, and from there discerned the call to become instructors with the Couple to Couple League in the 90s. And they were already older at that point and postmenopausal, so they taught for years in Spanish. And through that, I was exposed to it as a young teenager, and then became an instructor thanks to my wonderful boss in the Archdiocese of New York, who sent me to the BOMA course in 2004.
Wonderful, wonderful. So what drew you to becoming NFP instructors, especially you, Samuel?
I mean, one of the things that happened in college is that I was involved I went to Notre Dame for my undergrad, and we were in a little prayer group that really saw ourselves as being very radically Orthodox. And so we kind of engaged in all the different, battles of the cultural war. And one of them, of course, was this big divide between people who were for contraception and people who were for NFP, and we read Humane Vitae in college, and just we fell in love with the church's vision. And so for that reason, I was very drawn to NFP, like kind of on ideological grounds. But then afterwards, when I learned about it, I was like, wow, this is actually really good for a marriage. It teaches people virtue, and it's a way to be able to strengthen people's bond within marriage through this constant conversation and dialogue they have regarding their fertility.
I think the draw for me is seeing the joy that my parents had in their own marriage, and the beauty of witnessing them teach it to countless couples when I was in my young years. and getting to attend some of their classes and watch them teach as well, of course. But personally, when I was working in the Archdiocese of New York, I thought that it would be a wonderful tool, even as a single woman at that time, uh, to help with fertility awareness and monitoring fertility and helping young women prior to marriage, charting their cycles and discerning any sort of difficulties. I remember being asked to speak at the Beijing conference, Beijing plus 50 at the UN, on natural family planning, broadly speaking. And the connection there was the health issue. So it was not so much for postponing or achieving pregnancy, but women's health and how good it is to have something that is not only morally acceptable, but very healthy and affordable for women of all backgrounds and education levels throughout the world.
Right, right. So you both work in marriage and evangelization ministries at the Archdiocese. Can you share how God's plan for conjugal love and fertility awareness and natural family planning are really integral to the church's evangelistic approach?
I mean, if you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where it talks about the moment of judgment, they have very clearly the quote by St. John of the Cross, in the evening of life, you will be judged on love. And one of the things I've seen just in trying to explain the Catholic worldview is that love explains everything. Love is what is your deepest longing. You were made for love. And in order to be a good Christian, you have to have well-ordered love. This is an idea that Augustine, tried to teach us back in the 5th century. And so we push marriage a lot. I mean, you have a lot of people who have great desires to live out their faith, but they're getting that aspect of their life wrong. There's a lot of cohabitation, not just in Hispanic community, but in all communities across the board. And how can you approach your life of faith if you're getting this fundamental part of your life wrong? And so we tell people, hey, get married, get married within the Catholic Church, have that sacramental grace, and then live according to God's law. And that, NFP is integral to that. I don't know how you can even have an effective evangelization without NFP. It's a part of the gospel. As John Paul II kind of said in Evangelium Vitae, the gospel of life is at the heart of the center of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And NFP is one of the most important aspects of that gospel of life, where we respect not just life that has been conceived, but how that conception comes about. Right. And so for that reason, it's very important. It's a pillar of our efforts to evangelize, because NFP at bottom is the church's not the church's teaching. It's just natural teaching on what it is to love as a human person.
Right.
Yeah, and building on what Samuel said, we had the privilege of growing up throughout the papacy of Pope John Paul II. So for us, I think my conversion and deepening of my own faith is linked to his spiritual fatherhood and being able to trust what he said in regard to the church's beautiful vision for marriage and family. And so to spread the gospel, to be an evangelist, a joyful missionary evangelist and disciple of Jesus Christ for John Paul II was to become a gift, to be a self-gift to one's spouse, to others in our primary vocation. And that teaching is not just John Paul's. It comes from 2,000 years of the saints' lived experience and the magisterium. And what I've seen just in my own life is that it has led to joy. And this is the abundant joy that we want to share with everyone, that getting marriage right through the blessing of the sacrament and openness to children is a path to joy and eventually to heaven. And so part of the proclamation that we want to share in our archdiocese with our parishes and all families is that it's a true path to happiness.
Right. Samuel, you touched on this just a little bit, but has there been a shift in how couples are currently living that necessitates changing how we serve them?
I just think the culture has been so hardened by pornography. I mean, if the average child encounters pornography at the age of 11, if the number one addicted demographic to pornography is teenage boys, then when we reach them when they're about to be married, when they're engaged and coming to marriage prep courses, it's already too late. So there has to be a way of getting the message out earlier. I mean, Adriana does something with where they try to reach out to young girls and speak about NFP as fertility awareness. It's not just fertility awareness; it's awareness of your body. I mean, there's so many things that you can figure out through a chart that just give you light years more information about your body and possible pathologies that there are there. That it's just very helpful on the level of a health issue. But the shift has to be that we reach people much earlier with the message of NFP. And one of the things we encountered when we were doing we received a survey for the Diocese of Oakland when I worked there to write the relatio, the summary of it for the bishop to be sent to the synod back in like 2012. Right. And when we got the questions regarding NFP, it wasn't just laity, but it was also priest who misunderstood what NFP was. They were saying that the church should not be talking about science, as if the church could not say anything true about reality. That's literally what it comes down to. And so we're way behind the eight ball in terms of our messaging, because NFP is perceived as archaic, and chauvinistic. Okay. But it's actually cutting edge science. And it is utterly pro woman. And so there's just, the culture has been coarsened. And for that reason, we need to reach people earlier. So there has been a shift. I would even say there's been a shift in the last 20 years, because now through social media and through the internet, there are voices that are reaching our children at a far younger age that are very pernicious on a whole gamut of issues. And this is like not even the first issue, is like the fifth issue. And we already lost the first four. So.
Yeah, my own observations are similar to Samuel's. I've been working in different archdioceses for several years now, and something I've always noticed is as we get to the younger generations, the millennials and now the Gen Zers, and work on remote preparation for marriage and then proximate and immediate preparation, is that they're coming more and more to the church out of obligation and not necessarily because they long for the sacrament. And so there's been a real shift away from what would have been a more cultural Catholicism, maybe that we saw 40 years ago, to more of a, let's do this because my parents are asking me to. And so we are needing to evangelize a lot more intentionally in a charismatic way that I had not seen 30 years ago, 20 years ago when I started working. Back then, the emphasis was on theology of the body and bringing in a robust catechesis on what it means to be created in God's image and likeness, for love, to give love. We're still doing that 20 years later, but we're working with people who don't know what it is to be a disciple and don't even care. It's not part of their life. They're just coming to receive the sacraments because it's an ask of the church. And so we're having to change our methodology and approach to share the good news with them. I've also seen, in addition to the pornography scourge, the effects of radical feminism on women, and they're very negative. They're teaching women that their bodies should be manipulated, treated like machines. So pills and any form of even abortifacient contraceptives are fine as long as a woman has the so-called freedom and independence to pursue her earthly dreams prior to considering marriage, if marriage even becomes a consideration. So these are the things, the big shifts that I've seen with the cultural landscape. So people not caring about a sacramental marriage at all, and not even caring about a natural marriage. So perhaps choosing not to marry or just to cohabitate. We're in different times these days. And the trend has been so extreme that now we're touching with the transgender ideology, which is touching our young people, especially our teenage girls and our young teen girls, in a way that really teaches them that their fertility is almost a burden and a curse, something to eradicate and something to suffer infertility just to become a so-called boy. So we're just in different times now, and our approach has to change to serve the people that come to us.
Right. So, Adriana, in the marriage catechumenate, it sounds like there needs to be some kind of a renewal of marriage preparation and newlywed outreach, and maybe even earlier than that.
Yeah, the whole gamut of the life of the Christian disciple needs to be profoundly renewed with
Right.
the virtues to be able to become a gift of self and one's vocation. It's something that John Paul II saw in the 80s. So in Familiaris Consortio, he shared with us the beautiful vision for conjugal love and a Christian life, a family life lived to the full. And in there, he started talking about the time of marriage preparation as a form, a catechumenate form, a way of accompanying people in their growth and discipleship. So the idea began decades ago under his papacy, was advanced in Pope Benedict's papacy, and then now in Pope Francis's papacy, we're seeing the developed thought of the church coming to accompany all of her young people in the discernment of marriage in a more robust and intentional way. This is called the marriage catechumenate. It's taking the best of the ideas of the RCIA catechumenate and applying them to the intensive preparation, starting with proximate preparation and then extending it into what's called the mystagogy period, the first several years of married life. And this is to answer that need to radically infiltrate the lives of nominal Catholics who could care less about becoming a disciple of Christ.
Right. So, do you see the parishes within the Archdiocese incorporating like natural family planning in those evangelization efforts, like within RCIA and marriage prep and just general catechesis?
It's been a slow process, but something that I've seen just in the past 4 years of living here is a more intentional teaching on openness to children, especially with NFP Awareness Week. Every July, we dedicate a week to proclaim the goodness, truth, and beauty about conjugal love and openness to children and the gift of human life. And I've heard beautiful stories of English-speaking and Spanish-speaking priests throughout our archdiocese giving these incredible homilies to encourage married couples to experience that authentic joy and be open to children. And so it's been a slow process, but it's starting to take shape and happen. We are having an intentional outreach by our NFP instructors throughout the archdiocese during this time to give voice to the message and share it both in person and virtually online. So it's starting to happen, and I think the fruits will be seen in the next decade.
Yeah, it takes time. It does take time.
You know, the big problem with incorporating NFP within the Hispanic community is that there's just a dearth of teachers. When I lived in Oakland, I got a phone call from someone from the Diocese of Sacramento and the northern part of it, which is pretty rural. And this woman was told, hey, you have to use NFP. You can't have any other methods. You can't use, artificial contraceptives. And like, okay, that's fine and dandy. But then she was looking for a teacher and she could not find a teacher within 100 miles because she was in a rural area. And so we encounter this issue a lot in the Hispanic community, that we just don't have enough teachers to be able to teach NFP. And for that reason, I think in the sell in the Hispanic community has been harder. Not so much because they're less faithful or more antagonistic to the teachings of the church. No, more because it's a hardship, and they just don't see it a lot.
Right.
In the non-Hispanic community, in the English-speaking community, there are a few teachers here and there. You may not know many, but usually there's someone that you can get to. But in the Hispanic community, there are people that literally can't get to a teacher. And so one of the reasons I wanted to learn NFP, being the director of Hispanic evangelization, was to be a recruiter of other teachers. I'm only one person. I can only help so many people, but I can help recruit others. And I think teachers make the best recruiters. And so we have to find a way as leaders in evangelization to multiply ourselves. And I always tell people, if you're going to be some kind of leader within the Catholic Church and as a Hispanic, definitely try to learn NFP. We have men who are interested in becoming deacons in Spanish, and I would love for every deacon candidate within the Hispanic community, but also in the English-speaking community, to learn NFP.
Yes.
They become very natural people to head up marriage prep programs. We've been finding that. And also very good people to become teachers. I have an uncle actually who's a couple league teacher. He teaches in California. His name is Mario Vasquez, and he and his wife Selena have been teaching NFP for like 20 years now, and they do amazing work. I mean, they literally they use NFP to drive their evangelization because they put the message at the forefront, and they might be, if not the most successful, one of the most successful Spanish couples in teaching NFP anywhere because it's front and center for them. But in general, that does not happen. It's very rare, and it creates a hardship for Hispanics who want to be faithful because they want to be faithful. They want to follow what the church says. But they also have the hardship of not being able to financially support another child. So what do you do? And that I think that we as part of the institution of church are to blame for not being able to resource people with this great need.
We work on is forming leaders at the parish and regional level. And so from those new teams that are focused on marriage evangelization, we're seeing that if we can spend time with them and intentionally mentor them and coach them, in time, they will discern a call to go deeper. And the good news is that has happened in one of our parishes that's very large here in our archdiocese with regard to the Hispanic marriage team there. From that team is coming interest of one of the leading couples to become NFP instructors. So that's the good news. It's starting to happen. It's just a little bit slower and will take more time.
So Samuel, the Hispanic community in particular, you talked about the challenge of, just the lack of NFP teachers to be able to minister them. What are some other challenges in general that you have come across in dealing with the Hispanic community?
I mean, you think of every issue that you have in the American context, but add to that the insecurity of not having not being legally here in the United States. We have some couples that say, "Well, why should I get married? Because I'm probably going to go back to my own native country, or one of us might get separated." And so a lot of people just have someone here for the stay, for a while. So we encounter people who come to us that they're very cynical about marriage. In Latin America, cohabitation is a huge scourge. It's a huge scourge. And I remember reading one time, Helen Alvarez, she says this a lot in her presentations. And then I read it in an article, but she says only the rich get married in the United States. It's like only people who are more affluent get married in the United States. And the reason for that is because a lot of people think of marriage as kind of like the end point as opposed to the beginning point. The regular couple will cohabit. They'll shack up, and think, okay, let's get our cars, let's get our careers, let's buy our house, and then once we have all that, then we can get married. And whereas, when we got married, it's like that stuff came later. We wanted to have the marriage first, but most people kind of invert the order. Okay, in the Hispanic community, that you also have the added burden of being legally able to be in this country. And so some people will never reach that stage. And so because of that, you have a culture where very few people get married. Only the people that get married are those that are more affluent. It has very little to do with faith. And for that reason, we encounter a very kind of resistant community. It's very sad, because they're a very faithful community. I have Hispanics who come to events, and they're charismatics, and they're like praising Jesus, and they talk about following Jesus and all that, but they're cohabiting. So it's almost the opposite problem with the non-Hispanic community, that we have people who are evangelized to an extent, but not sacramentalized because they haven't had the issue. They haven't had their marriage, the sacrament. So that's how we encounter it in the Hispanic community. It's very hard. We try to convince people to marry, but there's a lot of hesitancy to do so for different reasons that you would find in the non-Hispanic community.
Pope Paul VI talked about how young people today are seeking witnesses more than teachers. And that we found that in the Hispanic community, they seek both. And so one of the first things we did when we came here is we started a leadership formation course in marriage and family in Spanish. So before we even did one in English, we launched into one in Spanish. And like Samuel said, many of them were already very well evangelized and they were part of a robust charismatic group, but they longed to be taught. And so for them, many of whom were married, hearing about the church's teachings on the sacrament of marriage it was the first time almost that they were being taught and explained what it meant, actually, the nuts and bolts, so to speak. We included a full natural family planning class as part of the formation because we thought it was that integral. And so that's what the church is seeking. It's seeking witnesses for the most part, but in our Hispanic community, witnesses and teachers.
Right. So when I think of families in Latin America, I picture, a large family. Do you think that the view of family size has changed for Hispanics in particular, because of the transition maybe from their home country to living in the United States?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think large family size has a lot to do with the fact that people weren't using contraception. And in farming communities, you also probably wanted to have a big family. But for example, I'm from a family of 5, and people think that's big, but my parents were both from a family of 14 each. And I have 70 cousins, for example. But you will never see that in the Hispanic community in this country, unless they're people who are like kind of ideologically driven to do so. It's just not a fact anymore. Hispanics tend to have very small families, just like other people. They appreciate children more, like I think culturally, but the still family size is smaller, and that's just they've been, they bought into this American culture that only seeks to have 1.4 kids, and so it's very sad, and I don't think anyone has gone unaffected by that. And so
it's a beautiful heritage.
Yeah, I mean, you think about large families also like in Italy, and Italy has like the world's lowest population rate. Latin America is better than Italy in that respect, but not much better. Probably still better than the average American, but not that much better. What I would say is that there Hispanics who predominantly speak Spanish do tend to have a higher fertility rate than Hispanics or non-Hispanics who predominantly speak English. Okay, so there's something about speaking Spanish that still kind of like is open to life and to having more children than the average couple in the U.S. would. And so that's why this is reflected obviously in the census data, that the United States would be at either replacement or just below replacement levels, were it not for Hispanics, largely for Hispanic immigrants who have come into this country and have more children. Not as much as in past generations, but still more than their non-Hispanic peers.
In our archdiocese, we've been supported and blessed by Archbishop Schnurr to launch a renewal of our evangelization in marriage and family using the marriage catechumenate. So I was speaking about it more broadly a little while ago, but now specifically at the behest of the Holy See, the 2022 document, Catechumenal Pathways for Married Life, is now taking flesh in every diocese of the world, God willing. And in ours, Archbishop Schnurr approved new guidelines effective this past January 1st under the patronage of Blessed Luigi and Maria Beltrame Quattrocchi, a wonderful 20th century Italian married couple who are about to be canonized together. Some of the very few saints married to each other. So we have great patrons. We are excited to see how this renews our own culture here in the Archdiocese for our Hispanics and our non-Hispanics, and our parishes, to see the fruits, larger parishes and more intentional families.
What are you both most excited about within your respective ministries at the Archdiocese? Anything for you, Samuel?
Yeah. When it comes to be working in a diocese, you're doing the work of ministry, and I kind of tend to approach the work of ministry more with a kind of a teacher's hat. I love to teach people about the faith, and we have seen. I do almost everything I do is in Spanish, and I have seen that people just don't know how beautiful the church and powerful the church's teachings are, how they actually present a full view of the human person that takes into account, all the different dynamics that a person will experience, that takes into account the struggle to overcome yourself, to make a gift of yourself to others. And whenever we've taught this, it's such a compelling vision, and just to see people like get it for the first time, where they see how beautiful it is, and we have rooms where there's silence, there's just pure silence, and you can tell the Holy Spirit is floating, in that room, touching people's hearts. That to me is the most beautiful part of it. The struggle to live it is real. People struggle, and even if they see the beauty of it, it doesn't mean that they don't see the struggle that will come in living it out. But most people don't even get that. They just don't. They're not guided by the light of truth, and we need to have more people who are out there teaching that truth. But to be able to do so is, I think, really exciting, and a great privilege to be able to share the church's teachings with people in general, Hispanics or not Hispanics. I'm thinking of that right now, especially in light of the issue of gender ideology. If we were to have equal airtime with the proponents of gender ideology to make our case, we would totally destroy them. It's a non-fight. The way the church describes the gift of your own gender and how it's good, and how God knew what he was doing. And even if you have certain struggles, that the response is not what, gender ideology proponents say. It's what the church says. It's just, that's one of the new places where we have to confront the culture, because it's a battle we're losing, not because we don't have the answers, but because we haven't been able to get the message out. Of course, there are so many reasons for that, but it's not a battle that's lost in terms of what we have to say. The church has the answers because her Lord is truth, and if we present him and his vision of the human person to the world, it'll set the world ablaze.
Building on what Samuel said, I think part of the good news in changing our methodology, like I mentioned earlier, is not just teaching and preaching, but offering the chance to bring people into an intimate encounter with Christ if they haven't done that in decades prior to receiving a sacrament. So part of our marriage catechumenate rollout in this archdiocese is a charismatic retreat during the formation period prior to marriage. And one that we've done here very successfully is the Genesis Marriage Preparation Retreat. We offer it to over 1,000 couples, well, a little bit less than that per year. We offer it in English and Spanish. And I would say the most tangible fruits that we've seen almost immediately is throughout the day, giving witness to different aspects of the sacrament of marriage through a walkthrough of the vows. So explaining what it means to say yes to one's beloved at the altar in terms of the questions of consent. And the apex of the retreat is not just the couple's witnesses, but what we call the Heart of the Father presentation, where usually a priest gives an explanation of the mercy of God the Father that is experienced through the sacrament of confession. And so for us to see these couples start the retreat day with their arms crossed and maybe a scowl on their face or impatience because they have to do this as part of their marriage formation, get to the heart of the Father talk, hear about the love and mercy that he has for each soul, and then be invited to adore Jesus in Eucharistic adoration and go to confession. We've seen long confession lines. We've seen tears. We have seen a change of demeanor and the participants at this retreat after confession. It's almost night and day.
Yeah, night and day.
Yeah.
So it's just one of the fruits of really preaching the good news of Jesus Christ incarnate, passion, death, resurrected, ascended, and his personal invitation, which we call the kerygma.
And one of the really cool things about that retreat, especially with the Hispanic couples, as we do the Spanish, is, as someone says, if you go to a Spanish mass, hardly anyone goes to communion. If you go to an English mass, almost everyone goes to communion. And the difference is that the Hispanics believe it. And because they believe it, they know they can't receive if they're not worthy. And so Hispanics know that, hey, if I'm living if I'm cohabiting, I cannot go to confession because I'm living with, my fiance, girlfriend, as if we were husband and wife. And so when we present the topic of confession, they'll tell us, well, I can't go to confession because we live together. And then we tell them, no, you can go to confession if you decide to wait until marriage. And this is one of the times where we've seen that this dissonance between them being evangelized and sacramentalized, non-sacramentalized, actually works in our favor. Because it was like, if you really believe that God is God and that he has the power to heal you and the power to give you his grace, then you can make a commitment today to live as brother and sister until the day you get married. But it's your decision. And you can feel the tension in the room as these couples will go out, have a conversation, and then they'll come back and they're like, okay, we're going to go to confession. And it is powerful. It's almost like you don't even want to be in the room because you want to give them space to be able to receive this teaching. But that's a very powerful moment. I mean, and the same thing too with the church teaching with NFP. It's challenging. If you present the teachings not in a rosy way, but in a very real way, hey, the struggle is real. I've gone through it, but you can do it, and it will bless you, and it will bring you closer together. It'll be hard.
It does.
But God has the grace to be able to change your heart and give you the strength to be able to live this out. So be a man, estovir, and embrace these teachings. It's powerful. Okay, so we present the church's teachings never in a way that is not true. It's always real. It's a struggle. Like as one author said, he wrote a book called the Sinner's Guide to NFP. All of us are sinners who live out, who try to live the church's teachings regarding NFP. And so recognize that, but recognize even more so that God has the grace God can give you the grace to be able to live it as he wants.
Some people think that NFP is solely for postponing pregnancy, that it's Catholic contraception is a bad way to put it, because that's exactly what it's not. But the truth is that this teaching, which leads to the documentation of a woman's cycle, is valuable to a couple who has subfertility, repeated miscarriages, as we've had, or primary or secondary infertility at different stages in their married life during their reproductive years. Wonderful Christian Catholic NFP only physicians and nurse practitioners and all the medical field who's involved in natural family planning is one of the best, least known gifts, I would say, to those couples that struggle with the cross of infertility. We have specialists who give lectures at the Catholic Medical Association and speak about the ethical treatment of infertility and the accompaniment on the emotional and spiritual level of couples going through this cross. And as we've discovered, as the years have passed, the last few decades, this is a newer area of development for the church to be able to reach couples and have something to say both spiritually and through the voice of reason and science. So for NFP to be on the forefront with FEM, with NAPRO, with neofertility, some of the greatest and best minds who've been working on helping people heal are at the forefront of this particular area of the church's ministry.
It's so helpful for those families when they, find that there is an ethical way to deal with their infertility. That's such a relief for them.
In our archdiocese, we have a saint that we pray to on his feast, Saint Gerard Mejia, and his feast is October 16th. And every year we gather to have Mass together to venerate his first-class relics. And this is kind of a neat story. The first time that we did this was in 2021, I believe was our first gathering for couples with this cross. And one of the couples that was there, I won't mention their names, were just weeping during our time of fellowship and testimony and presentations. And God bless them. Like 2 years later, not even, they were healed of their infertility and they now have a baby. So I do believe it was the encouragement they received, the grace of the sacrament of marriage that they've been given through being married together in the church. And of course, this powerful intercessor saint that we have.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Samuel and Adriana, for being on the PeakDay podcast and sharing your just great wealth of knowledge. And thank you for your ministry within the Archdiocese for both of the communities that you serve.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.